Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay updated with every new story.
I don't know
Play
if I can go
something
through
or
with this.
starve. The billionaire laughed at her. Those words would haunt Marcus Sterling for the rest of his life. Because what happened next in that upscale hotel restaurant didn't just shock everyone present. It completely shattered everything he thought he knew about talent, class, and human dignity. A homeless 19-year-old girl named Sophia had just walked into the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan asking for work or just a simple meal. Within minutes, she'd be standing at a concert grand piano about to deliver a performance that would leave a room full of wealthy patrons speechless. Sophia Rivers had been surviving on the streets of New York for 8 months. Every morning, she'd wake up in the shelter, pull on the same worn jeans and faded jacket, and head out to find work. Any work that would pay enough for a decent meal. But Sophia wasn't always homeless. Just 2 years ago, she'd been a rising star at Juilliard, a child prodigy who'd been playing piano since she was 4. Her parents, both musicians themselves, had sacrificed everything to nurture her talent. Then the accident happened. A drunk driver took both her parents in one terrible night, leaving Sophia with nothing but grief and a mountain of medical bills. The insurance money ran out. The apartment went first, then the piano, then everything else that mattered. Now she cleaned offices at night and waited tables when she could find shifts. Her fingers, once nimble enough to tackle the most complex compositions, now scrubbed floors and carried trays. The calluses had changed, but the muscle memory remained. This particular Tuesday morning, Sophia found herself standing outside the Meridian Grand, a 5-star hotel known for its crystal chandeliers and clientele who paid more for lunch than most people made in a week. The restaurant's ornate windows revealed glimpses of marble floors, and in the far corner a beautiful Steinway grand piano that seemed to gleam under the ambient lighting. Sophia's breath caught when she saw it. Her fingers twitched involuntarily, remembering. Inside that same restaurant, Marcus Sterling was holding court at his usual table. At 55, Marcus had built a hotel empire through ruthless business practices and an unwavering belief that people fell into 2 categories, those born to serve and those born to be served. He wore his wealth like armor, the perfectly tailored Armani suit, the Rolex that caught the light when he gestured, the air of absolute authority that made waiters nervously adjust their ties when he walked past. The problem with society today, he was telling his lunch companion, is that we've forgotten the value of earning your place. Everyone expects handouts. Sophia pushed through the revolving door, her heart hammering. She approached the host stand where an impeccably dressed man looked her up and down with barely concealed distaste. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked," he said before she could speak. "I'm not looking for a table," Sophia replied quietly. "I was wondering if you needed any help in the kitchen or waiting tables or—" "Miss, this really isn't the place for you. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the McDonald's down the street." "What seems to be the problem here?" The voice cut through the tension like a blade. Marcus Sterling had risen from his table and was walking toward them. The host immediately straightened, recognizing his most valuable customer. "Mr. Sterling, I was just explaining to this young lady that we don't have any positions available." Marcus studied Sophia with the same expression he might use to examine an interesting but ultimately worthless artifact. "And what exactly were you hoping to do here, young lady?" Sophia lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "Anything honest. I can clean, and I can serve. I can wash dishes. I just need work." Marcus's mouth curved into what might have been a smile, but his eyes remained cold. Work. Everyone wants to work until they actually have to prove they deserve it. The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter. Other patrons were openly staring now. "I'm willing to prove it," she said. "Are you?" Marcus's smile widened. "Well, then let me offer you an opportunity." He gestured toward the piano in the corner, and Sophia's heart stopped. Entertainment is part of the dining experience here. If you can play something, anything, that's actually worth hearing, I'll make sure you get a meal. Consider it earning your keep." Sophia stared at the piano, her mouth going dry. She hadn't played in months, not since she'd been forced to sell her keyboard. "Unless, of course, you don't actually have any useful skills," Marcus continued, his voice carrying just far enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "In which case, I think the McDonald's suggestion stands." Sophia looked at the piano again, that beautiful Steinway sitting there like an old friend she'd thought she'd never see again. Her parents' voices echoed in her memory. "Music isn't just what you do, Sophia. It's who you are." She took a deep breath and looked Marcus Sterling directly in the eyes. "I'll play," she said quietly, "but when I do, you listen." Something in her voice made Marcus's smirk falter for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. "By all means, let's see what you've got." The walk to the piano felt like miles. Sophia was acutely aware of every eye in the restaurant following her movement. Marcus followed at a leisurely pace, hands clasped behind his back. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to have some impromptu entertainment," he announced. "This young lady believes she has what it takes to earn her supper." Sophia reached the piano bench and paused. The Steinway was even more beautiful up close. Ebony, black with perfect ivory keys that practically glowed in the ambient lighting. She gently lifted the keyboard cover. The keys were perfectly clean, tuned, waiting. "Well," Marcus's voice cut through her reverie, "we don't have all day. My lunch is getting cold." Sophia adjusted the bench height with practiced movements, her muscle memory taking over. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this, the ritual of preparation, the moment of communion between musician and instrument. "I think we can all agree that everyone should contribute something of value to society," Marcus addressed the crowd like a ringmaster. "Work for what you receive. It's a lesson many people your age haven't learned." Sophia's hands hovered over the keys. She could play something simple. Take whatever scraps of dignity Marcus was willing to offer and walk away with a meal. But as her fingers touched the cool ivory, she heard her father's voice. "Never apologize for your gifts, Sophia. The world needs beautiful things." "I'm waiting," Marcus said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Perhaps something simple. Chopsticks would be perfect for your skill level." The condescension in his voice hit Sophia like a physical blow. She looked up at him. This man in his expensive suit surrounded by luxury, who thought her life was a moral failing rather than a series of tragedies she'd never chosen. "Actually," she said quietly, "I was thinking of something a little more challenging." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "Oh, such as?" Sophia's hands found their position on the keyboard. Chopin's Etude Op. 25 No. 11, The Winter Wind. The silence that followed was different from before. Anyone with even basic musical knowledge recognized that name. It was one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire, a whirlwind of notes that required not just technical skill, but deep musical understanding. Marcus's smirk wavered. "That's quite ambitious. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer something more accessible?" For the first time since entering the restaurant, Sophia smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been underestimated one too many times. "I'm sure." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she was 17 again, preparing for her Juilliard audition. Her parents were in the audience, her mother's hands clasped tightly, her father leaning forward with that expression of nervous pride. Sophia opened her eyes and looked directly at Marcus Sterling. "This piece is about surviving storms, about finding beauty in the most difficult moments." Marcus's smile had disappeared entirely. Something in Sophia's tone, in the way she sat at the piano, in the confidence that had suddenly replaced her earlier desperation, made him shift uncomfortably. "Well," he said, his voice lacking its earlier authority, Let's see what you can do. Sophia placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes that emerged from the Steinway weren't the gentle, tentative sounds Marcus expected. They were precise, controlled, and filled with a power that immediately commanded attention. Sophia's opening was flawless, the delicate melody that would soon explode into Chopin's notorious technical whirlwind. Marcus's confident smirk began to crack. He'd expected amateur plinking, maybe a butchered version of a popular song. Instead, he was hearing the opening measures of one of classical music's most demanding pieces played with a maturity that made his chest tighten uncomfortably. That's actually Chopin," whispered a woman at a nearby table. Her companion, an older man with silver hair, leaned forward with sudden interest. "Not just Chopin," he murmured back. "That's Opus 25, number 11. I heard Yuja Wang play this at Carnegie Hall." Sophia seemed oblivious to the whispered conversations around her. Her entire being was focused on the keyboard, her finger was moving with increasing complexity as the piece began its inevitable climb toward technical impossibility. Marcus cleared his throat loudly. "Well, that's a nice start, but—" The interruption died in his throat as Sophia launched into the piece's first major technical passage. Suddenly, the restaurant was filled with cascading notes, each one crystal clear and perfectly placed. This wasn't the playing of an amateur or even a talented hobbyist. This was the work of someone who had dedicated their life to mastering an instrument. The conversations around the room stopped entirely. Waiters paused in their service, trays balanced in midair. Even the kitchen staff had begun emerging from the back, drawn by the sound of music none of them had expected to hear in their workplace. Marcus found himself stepping backward, his earlier confidence evaporating with each perfectly executed passage. The homeless girl he'd intended to humiliate was revealing herself to be something else entirely. "She's not just playing the notes," the silver-haired man said in wonder. "She's interpreting it. Listen to her phrasing." Indeed, Sophia wasn't simply executing a technical exercise. She was telling a story through music, each passage building on the last, creating emotional architecture that had the entire restaurant in its grip. Marcus tried one more time to regain control of the situation. "That's quite enough," he said loudly. "Very impressive, but—" "Shut up!" The words came from the silver-haired man, spoken with quiet authority. "Don't you dare interrupt this." Marcus's mouth fell open. He wasn't accustomed to being spoken to that way, especially not in public. But when he looked around the room, he saw that every face was turned toward Sophia, every expression rapt with attention. He had become irrelevant to his own spectacle. Sophia's playing intensified, her right hand flying through the piece's notorious technical passages, while her left hand provided the steady, driving rhythm that gave the etude its nickname. The winter wind was meant to evoke a storm, and Sophia was summoning one in real time, her fingers moving so quickly they seemed to blur. A young woman near the window pulled out her phone and began recording. Others quickly followed suit. This wasn't just dinner entertainment anymore. They were witnessing something extraordinary, and they knew it. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead. This was supposed to be simple, a brief humiliation of someone who clearly didn't belong in his world, followed by the restoration of proper order. Instead, he was watching his worldview crumble in real time. The restaurant's acoustics worked in Sophia's favor. The music filled every corner of the space without overwhelming it, creating an intimate concert hall experience that none of them had expected when they'd sat down for lunch. "My God," breathed the restaurant manager, who had emerged from his office to see what was causing the unusual silence in his dining room. "We haven't had playing like this since... ever." Sophia approached the piece's climactic section, the passage that separated true virtuosos from merely talented players. Her breathing remained steady, her technique flawless as she navigated runs that would have challenged professional concert pianists. Yet there was nothing mechanical about her playing. Each note carried emotional weight. Each phrase told part of the story she was weaving. Marcus realized with growing horror that people were no longer looking at Sophia like she was a homeless girl pretending to play piano. They were looking at her like she was exactly what she was revealing herself to be, a trained musician of extraordinary ability who happened to be temporarily down on her luck. "Where did you study?" the silver-haired man called out during a brief pause between movements. Sophia didn't answer, couldn't answer without breaking the musical spell she was weaving, but her playing answered for her. This was conservatory-level technique combined with the musical maturity that only came from years of serious study. Marcus's hands were shaking now. The woman who had started recording was now live streaming to her social media, and the viewer count was climbing rapidly. "You guys, I'm at this fancy restaurant, and there's this homeless girl playing piano, and it's literally the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she whispered into her phone. Within minutes, comments were flooding in from around the world. Musicians, music teachers, and classical music lovers were all trying to identify the piece and the performer. Several recognized the etude immediately and were astounded by the quality of the performance. Sophia, oblivious to the digital audience she was gaining, continued to pour her heart into the music. Every frustration of the past 8 months, every moment of loss and grief, every memory of her parents and the life she'd lost, it all flowed through her fingers into the keys. But there was something else in her playing, too. Hope, resilience, the unbreakable core of who she was beneath the circumstances that had brought her to this moment. The climax was coming. Marcus could feel it building in the music, in the tension of the room, in his own racing heart. Sophia's fingers danced across the keys with impossible precision, each note crystalline and perfect. The winter wind was reaching its most demanding passages, and she navigated them like a seasoned professional returning to a favorite piece after a long absence. The silver-haired man leaned forward, recognition dawning in his eyes. "I know that phrasing," he whispered to his companion. "That's exactly how Elena Vasquez taught the piece. I'd recognize her interpretation anywhere." His companion, a music professor from Columbia, nodded in amazement. Elena only taught at Juilliard. How could this girl possibly? But Sophia's playing answered questions faster than words could ask them. This wasn't someone who had learned Chopin from YouTube videos or community center lessons. This was conservatory training, years of it, executed with the kind of musical maturity that suggested not just talent, but deep scholarly understanding of the composer's intentions. Marcus stood frozen, watching his carefully orchestrated humiliation transform into something unrecognizable. The restaurant had become completely silent, except for the music, and the quality of that silence had changed. It was no longer the uncomfortable quiet of witnessing someone's embarrassment. It was the reverent hush of people experiencing something extraordinary. The teenager who had whispered to his mother earlier was now recording with tears streaming down his face. "Mom, she's incredible," he breathed. "This is better than any concert I've ever been to." A woman at a corner table was frantically typing on her phone. "David, you need to see this," she was texting someone. "There's a girl playing piano at the Meridian, and she's absolutely phenomenal, like Prodigy-level phenomenal." Marcus tried to speak, to somehow reassert control over the situation, but found his voice had deserted him. This wasn't supposed to happen. The homeless girl was supposed to fumble through chopsticks or admit she couldn't play at all, providing a neat moral lesson about people knowing their place. Instead, she was delivering a performance that would have earned a standing ovation at Lincoln Center. The live stream that had started with a few dozen viewers now had thousands watching from around the world. Comments poured in faster than anyone could read them. "Who is this girl?" "This is Chopin Opus 25 No. 11, and it's perfect." "Someone find out who she is and get her a recording contract." "I'm a piano teacher, and this is making me cry." So, Faya approached the piece's most treacherous passage, where the right hand must execute lightning-fast runs while maintaining perfect clarity and expression. Lesser pianists often rushed through it, focusing only on hitting the correct notes. but Sophia shaped each phrase like a master sculptor working with sound. The restaurant manager had called over his entire staff to listen. Busboys, servers, kitchen staff, everyone stood at the periphery, mesmerized. Several of the servers were crying openly, overwhelmed by the unexpected beauty that had invaded their ordinary workday. In 20 years of managing restaurants, the manager whispered to his assistant manager, I have never heard anything like this. Never. Marcus's throat felt dry. He looked around the room and realized that something fundamental had shifted. People weren't looking at Sophia like she was a homeless girl anymore. They were looking at her like she was exactly what she was revealing herself to be, a world-class musician who deserved respect, attention, and admiration. The piece began its descent toward the final climax, and Sophia's playing intensified. The winter wind was reaching its emotional peak, and she rode the musical storm with the skill of someone who had learned to find beauty in chaos. A food critic who had been dining anonymously in the corner was now taking notes frantically. This isn't just exceptional playing, she scribbled. This is artistry of the highest order. How is someone of this caliber unknown? But Sophia wasn't unknown. Not really. She was just invisible to people who had learned to look past anyone who didn't fit their expectations of what talent looked like. The silver-haired man pulled out his own phone and began making calls. David, you need to drop everything and get down to the Meridian Grand, he said urgently. There's a pianist here you need to hear. No, I'm serious. And this is the real deal. David turned out to be David Richardson, artistic director of the New York Philharmonic, and within minutes, he was on his way across town, abandoning his own meeting. Because Dr. James Hartford, the silver-haired man who had recognized Elena Vasquez's interpretation, had never been wrong about talent. Sophia began the final approach to the piece's climax. The winter wind was reaching its peak intensity, and she navigated the technical demands with a combination of power and delicacy that left everyone breathless. The live stream viewer count had climbed into the tens of thousands. Music lovers from around the world were sharing links, trying to identify the mysterious pianist who was delivering a performance of stunning quality in what appeared to be a restaurant setting. But for Sophia, none of the external drama mattered. She was home again in the place where she'd always belonged. Her parents' voices echoed in her memory. Music is who you are, Sophia. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. The final climactic passage approached, and Sophia prepared to deliver the conclusion that would either validate everything she'd just played or leave the performance feeling incomplete. But she wasn't worried. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was born to do. Sophia's fingers struck the final climactic chord of Chopin's Winter Wind with thunderous precision. The last notes resonated through the restaurant's marble halls, lingering in the air like a promise fulfilled. Then, for one perfect moment, there was absolute silence. No one moved. No one breathed. No one dared break the spell that Sophia had woven around them all. Marcus Sterling stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The homeless girl he had intended to humiliate had just delivered a performance that would have earned a standing ovation at Carnegie Hall. Then, like a dam bursting, the silence exploded. Dr. James Hartford was the first to rise, his chair ping against the floor as he began clapping with slow, deliberate strokes. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted. People leaped to their feet, applauding with an intensity that shook the crystal chandeliers overhead. "Brava!" someone shouted from the back of the room. "Incredible!" called another voice. The teenager who had been recording was sobbing openly while he clapped. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life," he choked out between tears. Sophia opened her eyes slowly, as if awakening from a beautiful dream. She looked out at the crowd of people on their feet, their faces transformed by what they had just experienced. For a moment, she seemed confused. Then a small, wondering smile spread across her face. But it wasn't triumph in her expression. It was pure joy. The joy of sharing music, of connecting with people through the universal language that her parents had taught her to speak fluently. Marcus stood in the middle of the chaos, no longer the center of attention, no longer in control of anything. People pushed past him to get closer to Sophia, to thank her, to congratulate her on what they'd just witnessed. "Miss?" Dr. Hartford called out, his voice carrying over the applause. "What's your name?" Sophia wiped tears from her cheeks. She was crying, too, now, overwhelmed by the response. "Sophia," she said softly. "Sophia Rivers." "Sophia Rivers," Hartford repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "Where did you study?" "Juilliard," Sophia replied, her voice barely audible over the continuing applause. I was a student there." A gasp went through the crowd. Juilliard. That explained everything. The technique, the interpretation, the musical maturity that had left them all speechless. Marcus finally found his voice. "Now wait just a minute," he began, but his words were drowned out by boos from the crowd. "You should be ashamed of yourself," called out the woman who had been live streaming. "That girl has more talent in her little finger than you have in your entire body. How dare you treat someone like that?" added another voice. "She asked for work, not charity," said Dr. Hartford, his voice cutting through the noise with quiet authority. "And you turned it into a circus." The food critic who had been taking notes approached Sophia, her eyes bright with excitement. "Miss Rivers, I'm Sarah Martinez from the Times. Would you be willing to talk? People need to know who you are." But Sophia seemed overwhelmed by the attention. She stood up from the piano bench, swaying slightly, and for a moment it looked like she might faint. The restaurant manager rushed forward. "Miss Rivers, please sit down. Can I get you some water, some food?" He shot a withering look at Marcus. "Anything you want is on the house. I am so sorry for how you were treated." Marcus tried one last time to regain control. "Look, I was just trying to give her an opportunity to humiliate her," Dr. Hartford interrupted coldly. "That's what you were trying to do. But what you actually did was reveal something extraordinary." Hartford turned to Sophia, his expression gentle. "My dear, I'm Dr. James Hartford from the New York Conservatory. I need to ask you, why aren't you performing professionally?" Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. "My parents died 2 years ago. I couldn't afford to continue school. I've been surviving however I could." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the reverent quiet of musical appreciation. This was the heavy silence of people grappling with injustice, with the realization that extraordinary talent could be hiding in plain sight among those society chose to ignore. "Talent doesn't know social class," Sophia said quietly, looking directly at Marcus for the first time since finishing her performance. The words hung in the air like a musical phrase, simple and profound. Several people in the crowd nodded, some wiping away tears. Marcus's face had gone white. The viral video of his behavior was already spreading across social media, accompanied by Sophia's breathtaking performance. His name was being attached to one of the most beautiful demonstrations of human dignity anyone had ever witnessed. And he was not coming off well in the comparison. A commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. David Richardson, the artistic director of the New York Philharmonic, had arrived and was pushing through the crowd with several other people Sophia didn't recognize, but who clearly belonged in the music world. "Where is she?" David asked urgently. "Where's the pianist?" Dr. Hartford smiled and gestured toward Sophia. "David, meet Sophia Rivers. Sophia, this is David Richardson from the Philharmonic." David studied Sophia with the intense gaze of someone who had spent his life evaluating musical talent. "Miss Rivers, I heard the last few minutes through Dr. Hartford's phone. Would you be willing to play something else?" Sophia looked around the room, still overwhelmed by the attention, the applause, the complete reversal of everything that had happened in the past hour. She began, then stopped. She looked at the piano, then at the faces surrounding her, faces full of respect, admiration, and hope. "Everyone has a song inside them," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I just want to share mine." The crowd erupted in applause again, but this time it was different. This wasn't just appreciation for a beautiful performance. It was recognition of a beautiful human being who had maintained her dignity and grace despite everything life had thrown at her. Marcus Sterling stood at the edge of the crowd, forgotten and irrelevant, watching his intended victim become the hero of a story that would be told and retold for years to come. The aftermath unfolded like a fairy tale, to one grounded in the very real consequences of viral fame and genuine talent finally recognized. Within an hour, Sophia's performance had been viewed over 1 million times across multiple social media platforms. The hashtag #SophiaRivers was trending worldwide, with musicians, music lovers, and social justice advocates sharing the video and demanding to know more about the extraordinary young woman who had turned a moment of intended humiliation into a triumph of human dignity. Marcus Sterling sat alone at his table, his expensive lunch untouched and cold. His usual dining companions had quietly excused themselves, unwilling to be associated with what everyone was calling the most tone-deaf display of privilege in recent memory. The restaurant manager, James Morrison, had quietly asked Marcus to settle his bill and leave. "Mr. Sterling," he'd said with professional courtesy, barely masking his disgust, "I think it would be best if you took some time away from the Meridian. Your membership will be under review." Meanwhile, Sophia found herself surrounded by a growing circle of opportunity. David Richardson from the Philharmonic had offered her a spot as a featured soloist in their upcoming season. Dr. Hartford was arranging for her to complete her degree at the New York Conservatory with a full scholarship. 3 different record labels had called the restaurant asking to be put in touch with her. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah Martinez from The Times was documenting everything, ensuring that Sophia's story would be told properly, not as a feel-good charity case, but as a recognition of excellence that had been hiding in plain sight. "The system failed her," Martinez told her editor over the phone while watching Sophia graciously thank each person who approached her. "But her talent didn't fail us. She's been performing at this level all along. We just weren't paying attention." Through it all, Sophia maintained the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout the ordeal. She thanked everyone genuinely, accepted offers thoughtfully, and deflected attempts to turn Marcus into a villain. "He made assumptions," she told Sarah Martinez when asked about Marcus's behavior. "We all make assumptions sometimes. I hope today reminds us all to look deeper." Marcus Sterling's attempts to teach a lesson about earning your place had backfired spectacularly. Instead, Sophia had taught everyone present a more important lesson about recognizing worth beyond appearances. 6 months later, Sophia Rivers walked onto the stage at Lincoln Center wearing an elegant black concert gown, her hair pulled back in the classic style of a professional pianist. The sold-out audience rose to their feet before she'd played a single note. Many of them had discovered her through that viral video, and they'd been waiting for this moment ever since. In the front row sat Dr. Hartford and David Richardson, beaming with pride at their protege. Sarah Martinez was there too, working on a follow-up story about Sophia's meteoric rise in the classical music world. Sophia had recorded her debut album, Hidden Voices, which had debuted at #1 on the classical charts. She'd completed her degree at the New York Conservatory with highest honors. Most importantly, she'd established the Sophia Rivers Foundation, providing music education and instruments to underprivileged young musicians. As she sat at the concert grand piano, a Steinway naturally, Sophia thought briefly about that day at the Meridian Grand. The memory no longer caused her pain. Instead, It reminded her that sometimes our worst moments can become doorways to our best futures. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Winter Wind filled the hall, but this time everyone was listening from the very beginning. As for Marcus Sterling, he was learning humility the hard way, one public relations disaster at a time. But that's another story entirely. The music soared, and Sophia was finally completely home.